The Veliker Empire had ruled the Orion Spur for 12,000 years. They had conquered hundreds of species and absorbed countless worlds into their dominion. Their power was absolute. Their authority was unquestioned. When their scouts discovered a small blue planet on the edge of the galaxy, they expected nothing special. The inhabitants called themselves human. They had only been traveling through space for 5 centuries. Their fleet consisted of just 200 ships protecting their home system and 3 small colonies. World's High Arbiter Voroth Kelm sat upon his throne aboard the Imperial flagship Eternal Throne and listened to the scouting report. Around him, the Council of Supremacy laughed at the information. 200 ships. 3 colonies. A species that had barely learned to leave their own world. This would not even be a proper conquest. It would be a footnote in Imperial history. "We'll send the Third Dominion fleet," Voroth declared. 800 warships should be more than sufficient to bring these humans into the fold. They will surrender, or they will be destroyed. Either way, the outcome is certain. The council members nodded in agreement. But one voice spoke against the tide of confidence. "High Arbiter, I request permission to address the council." The speaker was Chronicler Seleth, the oldest living Veliker at 4,000 years of age. Her scales had faded to pale silver, and her eyes held the weight of centuries. She served as the keeper of ancient records, a ceremonial position that most considered meaningless. Voroth gestured impatiently. "Speak, Chronicler, but be brief." Seleth stepped forward slowly. "I have found fragmentary records from the first expansion. They speak of a species called the Terrans. These records are incomplete, but they describe beings who fought alongside the architects themselves, the species that built the hyperlanes before vanishing from history. Myths and legends," one council member scoffed. "Children's stories, perhaps," Seleth continued. "But these myths describe the Terrans with one phrase that repeats again and again. They called them those who do not yield. The records warn against engaging them in prolonged conflict." Voroth's eyes narrowed. "Are you suggesting that these primitive humans are the legendary Terrans?" "I am suggesting caution, High Arbiter. Nothing more." The council erupted in dismissive laughter. Voroth silenced them with a raised hand. "Thank you for your concern, Chronicler. But we are the Veliker Empire. We do not fear myths. We create them." Seleth bowed her head and returned to her place in the shadows. She said nothing more, but her ancient eyes held a knowing sadness that no one noticed. 3 days later, a Veliker diplomatic vessel emerged from hyperspace at the edge of Earth's outer defense perimeter. The ship broadcast on all frequencies, demanding to speak with humanity's leaders. Admiral Yuki Tanaka received the transmission aboard the command station orbiting Mars. She was a woman of 53. Years with silver threading through her black hair and a calm voice that had guided fleets through a dozen engagements. She listened to the Veliker demands without expression. "You will surrender unconditionally within 1 standard rotation," the Veliker ambassador declared. His image filled the screen, a reptilian figure with scales of deep purple and eyes like polished obsidian. "Your fleet will stand down. Your worlds will become territories of the Veliker Empire. Your people will serve. This is not a negotiation. This is a notification." Admiral Tanaka considered the message for a long moment. Then she spoke. "And if we refuse?" The ambassador blinked. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. He seemed genuinely confused by the question. In all his years of delivering ultimatums to conquered species, no one had ever asked that question. They begged. They pleaded. They bargained. But no one simply asked what would happen if they said no. "If you refuse," the ambassador finally managed, "you will be destroyed. Your cities will burn. Your species will be scattered across the stars as slaves. Your history will be erased. Your children will forget you ever existed." Tanaka nodded slowly, as if considering a restaurant menu. "I see. Please hold while I consult with our government." The United Earth Parliament convened an emergency session within the hour. Representatives from every nation on Earth and every human colony attended via secure channels. The debate was surprisingly brief. The vote was unanimous. President Okonkwo, a tall man with gray at his temples and steel in his spine, recorded humanity's response personally. To the Velikor Empire, he began. We have reviewed your terms of surrender. We find them unacceptable. We counteroffer the following. Leave our space immediately, and we will not pursue you. You have one standard rotation to comply. This is also not a negotiation. This is a notification. The transmission ended. Across the Empire, officials watched the recording in stunned silence. No species had ever responded to a Velikor ultimatum with an ultimatum of their own. It was absurd. It was suicidal. It was something they had never encountered in 12,000 years of conquest. High Arbiter. Voreth watched the message 3 times. His claws dug into the arms of his throne, leaving deep gouges in the ancient metal. Send the Third Dominion fleet immediately, he commanded. 800 ships. Full combat readiness. I want that world brought to heel within 1 cycle. Make an example of them. Let the galaxy see what happens to those who defy us. The order was given. 800 warships entered hyperspace, their crews eager for an easy victory against a primitive enemy. In the archives of the Eternal Throne, chronicler Selith sat alone among the ancient records. She had found more fragments of the Terran myths, pieces that had been buried for 10,000 years. She read the final passage again, her old hands trembling. They will come for you with fire. They will come for you with fury. But most terrifying of all, they will come for you with hope. And hope is a disease the Empire cannot cure. Sleth closed her eyes. The Council had laughed at her warnings. They had dismissed the myths as ancient nonsense. But they had forgotten something important. They had forgotten that the myths were not warnings about the Terrans. The myths were warnings for anyone. It's foolish enough to threaten them, far away. At the edge of a small solar system, Kei Tanaka watched the hyperspace signatures of 800 enemy warships approaching. 200 human ships waited in formation around their homeworld. The mathematics were clear. The odds were impossible. Tanaka smiled. Humanity had faced impossible odds before. Ice ages, plagues, world wars. They had survived them all. Not because they were the strongest or the smartest, but because they simply refused to accept defeat.
All ships, she announced over the fleet channel.
This is Admiral Tanaka. The enemy is approaching. They expect us to surrender. They expect us to break. She paused, looking out at the stars. Show them who we are. Across 200 ships, crews prepared for battle. They were outgunned. They were outnumbered. But they were human, and humans do not yield. The Third Dominion fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of Earth's solar system. 800 warships spread across the darkness like a swarm of metal predators. Their sensors painted the battlefield in cold, precise detail. 200 human vessels waited in defensive formation around the small blue world called Earth. Fleet Commander Draven Keth stood on the bridge of his flagship and studied the enemy positions. He was a veteran of 30 campaigns, and he had never lost a battle. The humans had arranged themselves in a standard defensive pattern, nothing creative or concerning. Their ships were smaller than Velikor cruisers and clearly less advanced. This will be over within hours, Keth announced to his officers. Perhaps minutes. These primitives have courage. I will grant them that. But courage does not win wars. Superior firepower wins wars. He opened a communication channel to the human fleet. This is Fleet Commander Draven Keth of the Velikor Third Dominion. You have one final opportunity to surrender. Power down your weapons and lower your shields. Any resistance will be met with total annihilation. The response came from a human woman with calm eyes and silver in her hair. Admiral Yuki Tanaka sat in her command chair as if she were attending a peaceful dinner party rather than facing certain destruction. Fleet Commander Keth, she replied, thank you for your offer. We have a response for you. She spoke a single phrase in the Velikor language. The words were ancient, from a dialect so old that Keth barely recognized it. Molin Labe. Keth's tactical officers scrambled to translate the phrase. It took them several minutes to find its meaning in the linguistic databases. When they reported back, Keth felt something cold settle in his stomach. Come and take them. Before he could respond, the human fleet moved. Every officer on the Velikor bridge watched in disbelief as the human ships accelerated toward them. The enemy vessels were not retreating. They were not holding position. They were charging directly at a force 4 times their size. Our acceleration readings are impossible, a sensor officer reported. Those ships should be tearing themselves apart. The structural stress is beyond any safe limit. But the human ships did not break. They pushed their engines past every boundary of logic and safety. They came screaming across the void like missiles made of desperation and defiance. The first exchange of weapons fire lit up the darkness. Velikor energy beams found their targets, punching through human shields and scoring armor, but the human ships kept coming. They took damage that should have crippled them and continued to fight. They absorbed hits that should have killed them and fired back with everything they had. Keth watched a human destroyer take 3 direct hits to its forward section. The ship was burning. Atmosphere vented from multiple breaches. By every standard of warfare, that vessel was dead. But it was not dead. It was still firing. It was still moving. And it was heading directly for one of his cruisers. That ship is going to ram us. The cruiser captain screamed over the communication channel. The destroyer struck the Velikor cruiser at full speed. Both ships vanished in a ball of fire and debris. But before the end, one final transmission came from the human vessel. Tell Earth we held the line. The battle raged for 6 brutal hours. Human ships took catastrophic damage and refused to stop fighting. Velikor commanders watched in growing horror as vessels operating at 10% hull integrity continued to engage. Human crews did not abandon ship when logic demanded retreat. They fought until they could not fight anymore. And then they found ways to fight some more. One human frigate, its weapons destroyed and its engines failing, positioned itself in front of a Velikor torpedo barrage meant for a larger human carrier. The frigate absorbed 17 torpedoes. The carrier survived. A human medical ship, unable to fight, flew between 2 battling formations to rescue survivors from a destroyed vessel. Both Velikor and human crews watched in astonishment as the unarmed ship collected escape pods while plasma fire exploded around it. No one fired on the medical ship. Even in the chaos of battle, something about its courage demanded respect. When the 6 hours ended, Keth reviewed the numbers with a growing sense of dread. The humans had lost 60 ships. 60 vessels and their crews gone forever. The Velikor had lost 200. Keth ran the calculation again. If the battle continued at this rate, destroying Earth's fleet would cost him half his armada. Half of 800 ships sacrificed to conquer a single primitive world. It was unacceptable. It was impossible. It was the first time in his 30 campaigns that Draven Keth had ever considered the word retreat. All ships, fall back to safe distance, he ordered. We need to reassess our approach. The Third Dominion fleet withdrew. The human fleet did not pursue. They held their position around Earth, battered and bleeding, but unbroken. Across the galaxy, the news spread faster than anyone could have predicted. A small fleet of primitives had forced the Third Dominion to retreat. The mighty Velikor war machine had encountered an enemy that would not surrender, would not break, would not die quietly. On dozens of occupied worlds, species that had been crushed under Velikor rule for centuries heard the reports. They gathered in secret and whispered to each other with something they had not felt in generations. Hope, if the humans could resist. Perhaps others could too. High Arbiter Vorath received the battle report in his throne room. His claws shattered the datapad as he read the casualty figures. 200 ships lost. 2 primitives. 2 creatures that had barely learned to leave their own atmosphere. Prepare the Eternal Throne for departure, he commanded. And summon the First Dominion fleet? Every ship. Every warrior. I will oversee this conquest personally. In the ancient archives, chronicler Salith had finally uncovered the complete text of the Terran myths. The records had been buried for 10,000 years. Hidden by emperors who found their contents disturbing, she read the final passage with trembling hands. They will come for you with fire. They will come for you with fury. But most terrifying of all, they will come for you with hope. And hope is a disease the Empire cannot cure. Slith understood now. The myths were not just stories. They were prophecies, and the humans were only beginning. Far away. Admiral Tanaka stood on the bridge of her damaged flagship and watched the Veliker fleet hold position at the edge of the system. They had not won, not yet, but they had done something no one believed possible. They had made the Empire bleed. "Repair crews, status report," she ordered. "Get every ship that can fly back into fighting shape." This was just the first round. Around Earth, the survivors of humanity's fleet prepared for the next battle. They had proven something important today. They had proven that they could be hurt, but they could not be broken. And somewhere in the depths of space, the first Dominion fleet was coming. 2,000 warships, led by the High Arbiter himself. The real war was about to begin. The first Dominion fleet arrived at the edge of Earth's solar system like a storm. It's made of metal and fire. 2,000 warships spread across the void, blotting out the stars themselves. At their center flew the Eternal Throne, the flagship of High Arbiter Voroth, Keln, the most powerful vessel in the Velikor Empire. Earth's remaining fleet numbered 140 ships. They had repaired what they could and buried their dead. They knew what was coming. They knew the odds were worse than before. Admiral Yuki Tanaka studied the enemy formation from her command bridge. 2,000 against 140. The mathematics were simple. The mathematics were death, but something unexpected was happening across the galaxy. "Admiral, we are receiving encrypted transmissions from multiple sources," her communications officer reported. "They are not Veliker." Tanaka opened the first message. The face on her screen belonged to a Kethvari captain, a member of a species that had been conquered by the Veliker 2 centuries ago. His scales were green where Veliker scales were purple, and his eyes held a fire that had been dormant for generations. "Admiral Tanaka," the Kethvari said, "my name is Captain Vorosh. We have watched your battles. We have seen what your people have done. For 200 years, my species forgot how to hope. You reminded us." Behind him, Tanaka could see the bridge of a converted freighter. Civilian ships turned into weapons by desperate hands. "We are coming to fight beside you," Vorosh continued. 12 ships. It is not much. But we will stand with you. The transmissions kept coming. Ships from the Morthania species enslaved 3 centuries ago. Vessels from the Threll, the Kaivon, the Sistari. Species that had been crushed under Velikar boots for generations. 40 ships in total, crewed by beings who had never fought together, using weapons that were outdated and hulls that were barely space-worthy. It was not enough to win. But it was something that had not existed in this galaxy for a very long time. It was an alliance of the defiant. Aboard the Eternal Throne, High Arbiter Voroth watched the sensor readings with growing irritation. 40 additional ships. Pathetic, insignificant. A collection of slaves and primitives pretending to be warriors. But beside him, Chronicler Selith saw something else. She saw the beginning of an idea. She saw hope spreading like a fire. Young Chiron stood at her post on the bridge, monitoring tactical displays. She was a junior officer, barely 50 years old, still believing in the glory of the Empire. But something had begun to trouble her. That night, she watched as a crew member was dragged before the High Arbiter. His crime was simple. He had expressed admiration for human courage in a private conversation. Voroth ordered his execution without hesitation. The crew member died with Velikor words on his lips. Perhaps they are right to resist. Chiron could not sleep after that. She found herself wandering to the archives where the ancient chroniclers sat alone among her records. "But what are the Terran myths?" Chiron asked. "The true myths, not the fragments the council dismissed." Selith studied the young officer for a long moment. Then she gestured to the chair beside her. "Sit, child. Let me show you who we used to be." The records told a story that Chiron had never learned. 10,000 years ago, the Velikor were not conquerors. They were conquered. They had been slaves under a tyrannical empire called the Dominion of Shadows. Their masters had treated them as cattle, as tools, as things to be used and discarded. But an alliance had risen against the Dominion. Species from across the galaxy had joined together to fight for freedom. and among those species were beings called Terrans, humans. They had fought alongside the Veliker ancestors. They had helped liberate Chiron's people. We forgot, Seleth said softly. We became the very thing we once fought against. The Empire erased this history because it was inconvenient, because it reminded us that we were once the rebels, not the oppressors. Chiron stared at the ancient texts. Everything she had believed was crumbling around her. The second great battle began at dawn, Earth time. The first Dominion surged forward, expecting to overwhelm the defenders through sheer numbers. But the humans had learned from the first engagement. They did not meet the Veliker in open combat. Instead, they used the solar system itself as a weapon. Human ships retreated into the asteroid fields between Mars and Jupiter. They hid behind moons and used civilian stations as decoys. Ships that the Veliker had recorded as destroyed in the first battle suddenly reappeared, paired in secret and ready to fight again. The humans hit the Veliker flanks and vanished. They struck supply ships and faded into the debris. They appeared where they should not be and disappeared before the Veliker could respond. High Arbiter, Vorath grew furious. This was not how war was supposed to be fought. This was not honorable combat. This was chaos. They are not trying to win, his tactical officer realized. They are trying to make us bleed. They are fighting for time. Vorath demanded an explanation from chronicler Seleth. She answered with the truth. Humans evolved on a world that tried to kill them every generation. Ice ages, plagues, predators, disasters. They survived not by being the strongest, but by being the most adaptable. They learned that the powerful are not always right. They learned that the weak are not always defeated. They learned to fight in ways that their enemies never expect. That night, Chiron made a decision that would change history. She accessed the Eternal Throne's secure communications and opened a channel to Admiral Tanaka. My name is Chiron, she said. I am sending you our fleet deployment codes and sensor frequencies. I am committing treason against my empire. Tanaka studied the young Veliker officer with calculating eyes. Why? Chiron thought of the crew member who had died for speaking truth. She thought of the ancient records that showed her people's forgotten history. She thought of hope spreading like a disease. Because I want you to show my people that the empire can be defeated. Show them that the myth is real. Using Chiron's intelligence, the human alliance launched a surgical strike. Not against the fleet, but against the Empire's communication relays. In 1 hour, 40% of all Veliker-controlled territories lost contact with the Eternal Throne, and in that sudden silence, uprisings began. Vorath received the reports in rapid succession. Slave revolts on mining colonies. Military bases overrun by their own conquered workers. Supply lines cut by ships that had been hiding for decades, waiting for this moment. He realized the terrible truth. He was no longer fighting a battle for one planet. He was fighting to hold an empire together. And somewhere in the stars, a young Velikor officer named Chiron watched the chaos unfold and felt something she had never experienced before. Freedom, rebellion. Spread across 37 Veliker-controlled systems. The news traveled faster than any ship could fly. The humans had not only survived, they had inspired others to fight. High Arbiter, Vorath faced an impossible choice. His fleet of 2,000 ships was the largest force in the galaxy, but it could not be everywhere at once. He split his armada in half. 1,000 ships remained at Earth to finish what they had started. 1,000 ships scattered across the stars to suppress the uprisings. It was exactly what Admiral Tanaka had hoped for. She stood before her fleet commanders in the battle-scarred conference room of her flagship. Around her sat humans, Kethvari, Morthani, and representatives from a dozen other species. They were not a unified force. They had different languages, different cultures, different ways of fighting, but they shared one thing. They had all been told they could not win. The Empire came to conquer us, Tanaka said. They expected us to surrender or die. We did neither. Now we show them what we came to do. She activated the holographic display at the center of the table. It showed the galaxy, marked with the locations of every uprising, every rebellion, every spark of resistance. We came to set the galaxy free. Ships arrived from across the sector in the following days. Freed slaves and stolen vessels, escaped prisoners who had hidden in asteroid fields for years, merchants who had concealed weapons in their cargo holds for generations, waiting for a moment that they feared would never come. The fleet swelled to 300 vessels. It was still not enough to defeat the Empire in open battle, but it was enough to keep fighting. It was enough to keep hope alive. Tanaka organized them into strike groups. Each group was led by a human captain paired with an alien advisor. The coalition was chaotic and untested. Communications were difficult. Tactics had to be translated across species barriers. But amid all the challenges, there was something the Empire had not faced in millennia: belief. Aboard the Eternal Throne, Orith's advisors gathered to propose a solution to the human problem. Their suggestion was simple and brutal: orbital bombardment. Destroy Earth's surface. Eliminate the source of the myth. Turn the human homeworld into a dead rock, and the rebellion would lose its symbol. Vorath considered the proposal. It would end the war quickly. It would send a message to every species in the galaxy: defy the Empire, and your world burns. But Chronicler Seleth spoke against it. If you destroy their world, you prove the myth true, she said. You prove that the only way to defeat humans is to destroy everything they love. Every conquered species will see that and understand something terrible. Vorath glared at her. What will they understand? That the Empire fears them. That humans were so dangerous we had to erase them completely. And fear of the conquered is the beginning of the end for any empire. Vorath dismissed her words, but he did not give the order for bombardment. Some part of him, buried deep beneath his pride, knew she was right. The third great battle began above Earth's moon. 1,000 Velikor warships against 300 coalition vessels. The mathematics still favored the Empire. But mathematics had failed the Velikor before. The battle was devastating for both sides. Ships burned and broke across the darkness of space. Crews died in fire and vacuum. The coalition fought with everything they had, using tactics that made no sense to Velikor strategists. Human ships protected alien vessels. Alien ships sacrificed themselves for human positions. Species that had never fought together moved as one. But amid the carnage, something remarkable happened. A Velikor cruiser suffered critical damage during the fighting. Its engines failed. Its life support began to collapse. The ship drifted between the two fleets, slowly dying. Standard doctrine dictated that the damaged vessel would be abandoned or destroyed by its own side to prevent capture. But a human medical frigate changed course and moved toward the dying cruiser. "What are you doing?" Vorath demanded over an open channel. "That is an enemy vessel." The human captain of the medical frigate responded calmly. "That is a ship full of people who are going to die if someone does not help them. We are helping them." The medical frigate docked with the Velikor cruiser. Human rescue teams boarded the enemy vessel and began evacuating survivors. Velikor crews watched in astonishment as their enemies saved their people. The rescued Velikor were treated with care and dignity. Their wounds were healed. Their lives were preserved. Some of the rescued officers began to question everything they had been taught about humans. During the battle's climax, Tanaka did something unprecedented. She opened an unencrypted communication channel that reached every ship in the system, Velikor and Coalition alike. "This is Admiral Tanaka of the United Earth Fleet," she announced. "I am speaking to every Velikor vessel. I am not offering threats. I am not demanding surrender. I am offering a choice." The fighting paused. Ships on both sides held their fire, waiting to hear what she would say. "Any Velikor vessel that wishes to withdraw may do so unmolested," Tanaka continued. "We will not pursue. We will not attack. We do not want your destruction. We want your freedom and ours. This war ends when you choose to end it." Silence followed her words. Then, slowly, a Velikor patrol ship powered down its weapons. Another followed. Then another. 17 ships lowered their shields. Then 30. Then 60. High Arbiter Vorath screamed orders to fire on the traitors. He demanded that his loyal ships destroy those who had surrendered. But his own bridge crew hesitated. They had seen the human medical frigates save their people. They had heard the offer of peace. Kyre and stepped forward from her station. She was no longer afraid. High Arbiter, she said. The fleet no longer believes in your war. Neither do I. Security officers moved toward Vorath, not to protect him, but to arrest him. The High Arbiter of the Veliker Empire was taken into custody by his own people, the First Dominion Fleet. Once the most feared force in the galaxy, requested terms for ceasefire. But as the guns fell silent above Earth's moon, Tanaka received an urgent message from deep space sensors. The celebrations died before they could begin. The Imperial Corps had received word of the fleet's surrender. The remaining Veliker loyalists had made a decision. They were dispatching the final armada. Every remaining warship in the Empire, 10,000 vessels. Their orders were clear: annihilate Earth, annihilate the Coalition, annihilate every species that had joined the rebellion. The war was not over. It was about to become a fight for the survival of every free being in the galaxy. Tanaka looked at the sensor readings and felt the weight of impossible odds settle on her shoulders once more. 10,000 ships. Against a coalition of 300, she thought of the crew member who had been executed for admiring human courage. She thought of Chiron, who had betrayed her empire to seek something better. She thought of every species that had risen up because humans had shown them it was possible. They had not come this far to fail now. The final armada assembled at the edge of Velikor space. 10,000 warships crewed by fanatics who still believed in the old ways. Their commander was Grand Executor Thalron, a true believer who would rather see the galaxy burn than admit the Empire's weakness. He had watched the uprising spread across the stars. He had watched his people surrender to primitives and slaves. He had sworn that it would end here. Against this force stood the coalition of free peoples. 400 ships from a dozen species: humans, Kathvari, Morthani, Veliker, defectors, and many others. They were outnumbered 25-1. The mathematics were not just bad. They were impossible. But humans had never been good at accepting impossible. The Council of Free Peoples convened aboard a human space station orbiting Earth. Representatives from every coalition species gathered to decide their next move. At the back of the room, under guard, sat former High Arbiter Vorath. He had requested permission to attend. He may know something useful. Vorath stepped forward slowly. He was no longer the proud ruler who had demanded humanity's surrender. He was a defeated man who had watched his empire crumble around him. "There is something I have not told you," he said. "A secret that only the highest rulers of the empire know. The Architect Gate Network." The room fell silent. Everyone knew the legends of the architects, the ancient species that had built the hyperlanes that connected the galaxy. They had vanished 10,000 years ago, leaving only their technology behind. The architects built a network of dormant hyperspace gates, Vorath continued. Gates that could transport a fleet instantly to any point in the galaxy. The Empire found them centuries ago, but could never activate them. The gates respond only to a specific biological signature. A signature we never possessed. Chronicler Seleth understood before anyone else. "The Terrans," she whispered. "The gates were built for the Terrans." Human scientists were brought to the nearest architect gate. It hung in space like a ring of silver metal, beautiful and silent. When a human engineer touched the control interface, the gate hummed to life for the first time in 10 millennia. Seleth watched with tears in her ancient eyes. She finally understood the complete truth. Humans were not just similar to the mythical Terrans. They were the Terrans, descendants of the ancient species who had helped liberate the galaxy, separated from the stars during some forgotten catastrophe, surviving on Earth, forgetting their origins, and slowly returning to space. The myths were not about a vanished species. They were a prophecy of return. Admiral Tanaka gathered her commanders for the final briefing. Her plan was audacious, perhaps insane. "We cannot defeat 10,000 ships in direct combat," she said, "but we do not need to defeat them. We need to break the Empire's will to fight. She outlined her strategy. A volunteer force would use the gate network to bypass the final armada entirely. They would jump directly to the Velikor homeworld. Not to attack it. Not to destroy it. But to deliver a message. If we can show the Velikor people that their core worlds are not safe, that the Empire cannot protect them, the psychological impact will shatter what remains of Imperial authority, Tanaka explained. We are not going to win this war with weapons. We are going to win it with truth. 50 ships volunteered for the mission. Their crews came from every species in the coalition. Humans flew alongside Kethvari. Velikor defectors served beside Morthani. They were the most diverse fleet ever assembled, united not by species or culture, but by belief in something better. The gate activated. The volunteer fleet vanished in a flash of light. They emerged above the Velikor homeworld. Defense stations powered up their weapons. Alarm signals echoed across the planet. But the coalition fleet did not fire. Instead, Admiral Tanaka broadcast a message on every frequency, reaching every corner of the Velikor world. People of Velikor, she said, we have not come to conquer you. We have not come to destroy you. We have come to remind you of who you used to be. She transmitted the complete history that the Empire had hidden. The records of Velikor slavery under the dominion of shadows. The story of their liberation by an alliance that included humans. The truth that the Velikor had once been rebels fighting for freedom, not oppressors crushing it. Your rulers have kept this from you for 10,000 years, Tanaka continued. They taught you to fear humans. They taught you that conquest was glorious. They made you forget that you were once like us, desperate, defiant, free. Across the Velikor homeworld, people stopped to listen. They heard words that contradicted everything they had been taught. They saw a fleet that could have attacked them but chose instead to offer truth, far away. Grand Executor Thalrin received word of the Coalition's appearance above his homeworld. He was furious. He was afraid. He made the only decision his fanatical mind could accept. Order the final armada to change course, he commanded. We will destroy the homeworld ourselves if necessary. The Coalition's corruption cannot be allowed to spread. His officers stared at him in horror. He was ordering them to fire on their own people, their own families, their own world. We would rather destroy everything than let them win, Thalrin insisted. The Empire's purity must be preserved. But his crews refused. They powered down their weapons. They ignored his screaming orders. The final armada, 10,000 ships built to conquer the galaxy, came to a complete stop. On the Velikor homeworld, civilians took to the streets. They had heard the human message. They had seen the Coalition fleet hold position without attacking, and they had heard their own Grand Executor order their destruction. The Imperial Council surrendered within hours. Grand Executor Thalrin was last seen retreating to his private chambers alone. No one pursued him. He was no longer relevant. 1 year later, the Galactic Coalition convened on neutral ground. Humans sat beside Velikor, Kethvari, Morthani, and dozens of other species. Former enemies had become partners. Former slaves had become equals. Ambassador Yuki Tanaka, once admiral of Earth's desperate fleet, addressed the assembly. We did not win this war because we were stronger, she said. We won because we remembered something that empires always forget. Power is not measured in ships or soldiers. Power is measured in how many people will stand beside you when the night is darkest. Chronicler Seleth. Now the Velikor representative to the Coalition spoke the final words. The myths warned us about the Terrans. For 10,000 years we wondered why they were feared. Now I understand. They were not feared because they destroyed their enemies. They were feared because they made others believe they could be free. And belief, once ignited, cannot be extinguished. Across the galaxy, on worlds that had known only oppression for centuries, children looked up at the stars. They had heard the stories now. Stories of small fleets facing impossible odds. Stories of enemies becoming friends. Stories of a species from a small blue world that reminded the galaxy what courage looked like. Their parents told them these were just stories, just myths, but the children knew better. Myths are how the future begins. Chiron stood on the observation deck of the Coalition station, watching ships from 100 worlds pass by in peace. She thought of the crew member who had died for speaking truth. She thought of her own decision to betray an empire that had betrayed its own people. A human officer approached her. He was young, not much older than her in relative years. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. A Korean smiled. It was an expression she had only recently learned to make. "I am thinking about hope," she said, "and how it spreads." Outside the window, the stars burned bright against the darkness. They had always been there, waiting for beings brave enough to reach for them together. The galaxy was free, and it had started with humans who refused to yield.